Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
So I've pointed out a few times to the point that people are starting to repeat it back to me, which is kind of nice, I guess, that Joseph is the star of more parshiot than anyone else in Genesis, right? He has 4 parshiot that are devoted to his story. But the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs pointed out that Joseph is also the weepiest character in the book. Okay, he weeps 7 times. Okay, and I want to run through them quickly. Okay, the 7 times that Joseph weeps. The first is when the brothers come to him in Egypt for the first time, and he overhears them saying, this misfortune has overcome us. We're being punished because of our brother. We saw his distress, but we wouldn't listen. And they, of course, don't realize that Joseph understands them, right? Because he's using an interpreter. So he turns, it says he turned away from them and began to weep. But then he came back and spoke to them again. All right, so that's the first weeping. The second weeping, they come down a second time, they bring Benjamin with them, and he was deeply moved at the sight of his brother. Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. He went into his private room and wept there. Okay, so the third time, right, when Joseph is about to take Benjamin prisoner and Judah makes his impassioned speech, so Joseph can no longer control himself. He kicks out everybody but his brothers, and he made himself known to his brothers, and the Torah says he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Okay, and then the fourth time he discloses his identity. He threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin embraced him weeping, and he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Okay, and then Jacob comes down, settles in Egypt, although he doesn't come to the palace right away. They don't come to the palace. They go to the land of Goshen. Okay, not where the Safeway is, but the one in Egypt. And Joseph goes down to Goshen. And as soon as Joseph appeared before him, he threw his arms around his father and wept for a long time. Okay, and now we have 2 weepings in this week's Parsha. The first is when Jacob dies. Joseph threw himself on his father and wept over him and kissed him. Okay, and then the final weeping that takes place a little bit after Jacob's death. Okay, and listen to this one and pay attention. Okay, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs that we did to him? So they sent word to Joseph saying, your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now, please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father. When their message came to him, Joseph wept. Okay, so just to be very clear, okay, Jacob has died. The other brothers say, oh my God, now that Jacob is dead, Joseph is going to get even with us, right? So they send the message, you ought to know that Dad said, when I die, send this message to your brother, forgive them, don't punish them. Now, there's no record that Jacob actually did this, right? I mean, this is something that the brothers came up on their own to kind of save their skin. And Joseph hears them and he weeps, right? Now, the other weepings make sense, right? He's overcome by emotion seeing his brothers, or he's sad that his father dies, right? And here, I mean, you know, sometimes I ask rhetorical questions, but this, I'm going to throw this out as a real one. The seventh weeping is puzzling, right? So why does Joseph weep when he gets this message from his brothers saying, Dad said, don't take revenge? Okay, why does he weep when he hears that?
Rabbi,
Yeah.
perhaps he is saddened to think that they would think he would seek revenge.
Right. He is saddened to think that they think he's going to take revenge. Right? That makes sense? Right. Anybody else?
They recognize that they've done wrong,
Right.
and obviously, as you point out, they're trying to mitigate their sin. And Joseph acknowledges that and has some degree of empathy for them.
Right. Which is precisely why the whole message seems unnecessary. Right? He's forgiven them. He said he's forgiven them. He said, don't blame yourselves. Okay? You weren't the ones who brought me to Egypt. God did. God brought me to Egypt. You were just the instruments of God's plan. I forgive you, right? So it seems superfluous. Dr. Conrad.
There's also another way to look at this, which is that oftentimes people will weep upon the reading of a will. And this is kind of an ethical will.
Okay.
And so that moves Joseph.
All right, he's moved because this is like an ethical will, okay, except it's fabricated. But he doesn't necessarily know it right now.
I think he's so disappointed at their trickery once more that it revolts him in an emotional way, and causes him to, of course, emote as in the weeping.
Okay, so Alan says, just for those of you who might not have heard, he's revolted by their trickery, right?
Once
again, for sure. All right, Alan, the problem that I have is that he doesn't know that this is trickery, right? He doesn't know. No, he doesn't know, right? I mean, we don't know, at any rate, we don't know that he knows, right? We don't know that he knows that there was no such command, right? Anybody else?
Rabbi, just a little bit of a depart from the question you asked. I, for one, I have a problem with the commentary saying that Joseph was I forget the words that you used, but the weakest of all. I don't.
Not weakest, weepiest.
Oh, weepiest. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I, for one, don't think that tears from a man is a sign of weakness.
No, I didn't say weak. I said he's the
got it.
weepiest. He's the one who weeps, right? I mean, he's recorded as weeping 7 times. Nobody else is recorded as weeping that many times. Yeah,
Well, if he believes that his father really wrote that, and maybe he's crying because he thinks that his father died not trusting him, or not trusting.
Okay, very good. So if he takes this message at face value, then he is upset that his father died not trusting him. Okay, and so I think either what Dee said the first time around or what Leslie said, I mean, both of them make sense, right? That he is upset that either his brothers think he's going to take revenge or his father thinks he's going to take revenge, right? Because he's already said, I forgive you. He said, I forgive you. He said, like I pointed out, this was God's plan all along, right? You were simply the instruments of God's plan. Don't be upset that you did this, right? But they don't trust him. They don't trust him. And his father doesn't trust him either, right? So I want to bring something that the late Rabbi Aharon Lichtenstein said. Rabbi Lichtenstein was the son-in-law of the late great Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik. He was the head of the yeshiva in Gush Etzion, but unusual, in Israel, where most Rosh Yeshivas don't even have a high school degree. But Rabbi Lichtenstein had a PhD in English from Harvard. Okay, and he writes that this last expression of this last act of weeping is an expression of the price Joseph pays for the realization of his dreams and his elevation to a position of power. Joseph has done everything he could for his brothers. He's made it clear that he does not harbor a grudge against them for what they did to him all those many years before. All right, but all these years later, his brothers do not trust him and fear that he may still seek their harm. And this is Rav Lichtenstein's comment. At this moment, Yosef discovers the limits of raw power. He discovers the extent to which the human connection, the personal connection, the family connection hold far more value and importance than does power, both for the person himself and for all those around him. Joseph weeps over the weakness inherent in power, over the terrible price that he has paid for it. His dreams have indeed been realized on some level, but the tragedy remains just as real. The torn shreds of the family have not been made completely whole. Okay? And I want to point out that Rabbi Lichtenstein died a few years ago, all right? And therefore, what he wrote cannot be a commentary on events of the past week. Having said that, they are entirely appropriate to events of the past week, right? You pay a price for realizing your dreams, right? You pay a price for power, okay? And elsewhere, Rabbi Sachs has written about the difference between power and influence, right? And this is something that anybody who's in a position of leadership needs to understand, right? And I don't care whether that is leadership over a nation or leadership over a small voluntary organization or even your family or anything in between, right? If you're strong enough, you can make people obey you. You cannot make people respect you, and you cannot make people like you, right? And sometimes the more you exercise raw power, the less people respect you, and the less people like you, right? And this is a hard-earned lesson, right? And when, for example, when young rabbis flame out, right? And it's not uncommon for young rabbis to come to their first shul and flame out because they come in and they say, I'm the rabbi and I paskin this and I paskin that, and I'm the rabbi, and this is what we do from now on, right? And You may decide what the shul does, but the shul decides if you're still around, right? And that ain't the way you do it, right? You have to convince people. You have to convince people, and you have to be around a while so that they respect you, all right? And if they respect you, you don't have to exercise raw power. You can exercise persuasion, right? But that is the way of the world. People resent, Kelly will tell you that the most commonly heard sentence in our house, whether from me or whether from her, but frankly, mostly from me, is don't tell me what to do, right? Don't tell me what to do, right? And if you want something done, convince me that it's in my own best interest, right? Convince me that I wanted to do it all along, right? Don't tell me. People do not like it, okay? And Joseph realizes that, yeah, his brothers don't trust him. And they don't trust him because of his exercise of raw power, right? And Rabbi Sachs wrote, the Tanakh and Judaism as a whole are a sustained critique of power. Power alienates. It breeds suspicion and distrust. It diminishes those it is used against, and thus it diminishes those who use it. Judaism is about an alternative social order which depends not on power, but on love, loyalty, and the mutual responsibility created by covenant. And this is why Nietzsche, who based his whole philosophy on the will to power, correctly saw Judaism as the antithesis of all he believed in. Okay, so power sometimes is a necessary evil. And sometimes it is. I have to tell you that, for 2,000 years, we learned what it was like to not have power, right? And now, Baruch Hashem, we're learning how to abuse power just like every other nation in the world, right? It's a necessary evil, but that doesn't mean, a necessary evil, right, has two conditions, necessary and evil, right? And the less we have need of it, the better. Shabbat Shalom.
Nashikawa.
And we continue with the Kaddish before Musaf service 155 in the Shabbat Siddur, 428 in the full Siddur. We'll say the